how Angular works in general, one of the key things that Angular has is bindings. And I'll show you an example of that in the code real quick, just to give a frame of reference. Okay, so here's an example of a binding. So strings.general equals promotions. That actually represents text that's stored in our strings.json file. And basically, the way Angular works is you have this digest cycle that occurs when something important on the page changes. And you can actually say, like, a user clicks this button and then propagate this change to this part of the page. And every time, typically, every single binding has to be evaluated on the page. And you can see this is one of the more basic ones, but if it was more, sorry, let's see here. So yeah, this is one of the more basic pages, so you don't see a lot of bindings, but if we go to something like search results, you'll see it's just a whole mess. I mean, that looks, if you don't know Angular, it looks like gibberish. But yeah, there's ways we can optimize this. So utilizing one-time bindings, that's what this double dot is. So if you only need it to evaluate once when the page loads, that's something that you do. We probably need to audit our website and see, like, where can we use this and where we shouldn't use this. Let's see. Another thing I wanted to talk about is using filters and function bindings. They're not necessarily never use these. We have to use them, but they're more expensive. So what happens is every digest cycle, they have to evaluate. And it could be that they're not necessarily as performant. One of the issues that we had when we first designed the search results is we were using a filter to filter all the results. And doing that every digest cycle on 50 plus entries was causing a huge amount of slowdown. So what we did was we actually manually did the filtering as a separate function call. And take it out of the digest cycle, because the digest cycle is not really informative on what should be changing all the time. So it basically is like a buckshot. It evaluates everything. So.
A question here.
Okay.
How are we determining that we are doing the right bindings, right watchers, and filters?
Okay. So I guess use the right tool for the job is kind of the main premise. For one-time bindings, like I said, if you only need it at the start, you only need to evaluate it once. So I'll go into a component and kind of skip ahead. So without getting into too much detail, these are actually one-time bindings as well, disable tooltip, pothole replacement. These are options set by the developer, but it doesn't have, like, the user state doesn't really affect whether or not we should disable the tooltip or anything like that. So that was my decision here in making that a one-time binding. It's like, it only needs to be known right when we create this component what these options are. So that takes some of the burden off of always evaluating every single change that comes into this component. Does that fully answer your question? Okay.
Partially, yeah.
Partially, yeah.
You know what kind of performance hit there is when you turn a one-time binding
into something else? It really depends on what it's doing. You just want to cut the number down, and it's not like there's no like specific increase that we can get, because these apps are so kind of complicated. Yeah, it's really like you can actually download a plugin that counts the number of watchers on a page, and it actually tracks scope.
It'd be nice if some way to determine. There's just a number of cases with inside optimization where we don't initialize tests until after the comments loaded.
Right.
All the templates loaded, all the bindings have been set. one-time findings, we can't modify for that. So
When,
it's
well,
not
what,
beneficial a lot of times for our work to do that.
what you can do, and what actually I do a lot, is you put an ngIf around like something that's markup related. Those can be one-time bindings because ngIf actually destroys and creates. So you're initializing it for the first time in many cases there. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And we can talk offline about something like that. Cool. Let's go to perceptual performance. I wanted to talk about this a little bit. This is more how the user perceives a performing app. And I think this is actually pretty important. So like, if you show indicators or you're changing stuff on the page, the user is constantly getting feedback. They're less likely to say, well, this is running slow. It takes away whether or not they feel like they're waiting too long for something. And then just, so utilizing resolvers, like basically you want to utilize resolvers and lazy loading and kind of have a sweet spot balance between the two so that the user